3. Students' listening ability will be enhanced, and students will be able to improve their speaking ability in terms of individual sounds, articulation, intonation, and fluency. And finally, students will be able to use English as a communication tool rather than just as a means of passing exams. And this is the background and problems of my subjects. The subjects for 42 freshmen divided into 8 groups of 4 and 2 groups of 5. And there are 4 periods of English each week, plus a period of English grammar, which is a selected course. And the textbook used is Far East English Reader Book 1. Activities were conducted for 15 to 20 minutes maximum on a weekly basis due to a tight schedule. And the English learning environment is exam-oriented and test-centered, and so are the students. As for their personalities, they are rather reserved, shy, timid, lack of confidence and critical thinking. Because there is no immersion in an EFL environment, so I tried to model English in my class. And a big challenge that I face is a large homogeneous class made up of multi-level students. These are the activities that I conducted in my class. The first one is GEPT listening pretest, and find someone who dial the phone, students' vocabulary worksheet, an English song, and I Love Her by the Beatles, the making of vocabulary cards, taboo words, Monopoly and create a Monopoly, the reading of One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish by Dr. Seuss. Critical thinking questions included in the reading of the textbook, GPT listening post-test, and finally to get their feedback, I designed a questionnaire and had interviews with student representatives and asked them to write down any comments they have on the activities. Now I'm going to explain how these activities help to solve the problems identified and how they turned out in my class. So this is find someone who, when the semester began, students just graduated from junior high school, they hardly knew each other, so this activity was conducted as icebreaker for them to get to know each other better. In this activity, students had to get out of their seats, talk to their classmates, and write down the names of their classmates who have the following experiences. And in my class, students did move around the classroom trying to talk to each other. However, a lot of Chinese was used, and they would gather in groups, sharing the information they got from their classmates. And students also had difficulty transforming these statements into yes/no questions. And the next activity is dialogue. Minimal pairs representing the numbers on the telephone were used to raise students' phonemic awareness and to practice the pronunciation of vowels. Students in pairs gave each other their phone numbers using these minimal pairs. So it's an activity related to their daily life. And in my class, my students were confused by these minimal pairs because most of them didn't learn phonetic symbols in junior high school. So they kept forgetting how to read those words that looked very similar to them. So I was busy moving around in the classroom trying to offer my helping hand. The next one is a vocabulary teaching activity. Instead of teaching every new word on the vocabulary list, I asked students to divide the vocabulary in one lesson into 3 categories: words that you know, words that you can guess from the context, and words that you don't know. And then students in groups discuss the meanings of those vocabulary in the reading. It's kind of collaborative learning. Students at a higher level of English proficiency taught those at a lower level. Through this activity, students can spend some time playing with the words, and teachers do not have to waste time teaching or giving lectures on the vocabulary words that students already know. And it also promotes guessing because guessing is an important skill. I also incorporated an English song in my teaching. The song was chosen because the lyrics are simple, the melody is beautiful, and the singing is very clear. The song was broken into 8 parts, and students have to rearrange the sentences and then number them in the correct order. So even low-level students can have fun. It also encourages group discussions and critical thinking because for extended activities, students have to choose one word that describes the mood of the song and discuss the meaning of the lyrics with their partners and talk about the modest point in the lyrics. My students had problem with the discussion questions afterwards. They were unable to carry out the discussion in English. And so a lot of Chinese was used. And even if they did come up with any answer, the answer was very short, such as happy or sad. And the modest point was especially difficult for them. The next one is the making of vocabulary cards. In order to help students enlarge their vocabulary so that they can better express themselves in English, I asked them to make 5 vocabulary cards for each lesson. This activity is also expected to help them remember new words more easily and help them to learn vocabulary in context instead of learning words by rote. In the center is the vocabulary that students encounter somewhere, and they have to write down the sentence where they find the word. Afterwards, they make a guess about the meaning of the word, and then they go to look up the word in the dictionary and write down the definition and a simple sentence. And they also have to write down the related words. And there are 2 of my students' works. The next activity is table words. On top of the card is the vocabulary word in one lesson of the textbook. And below the vocabulary word are the table words that students mustn't say in an effort to get his or her group members to say the vocabulary word correctly. So it's a practice for listening and speaking. It's also a good way to review the vocabulary word that students have just learned. In reality, they look like this, so I have to make these cards myself. When we played the game in Canada, the game was quite exciting. But due to my students' incompetence in expressing themselves in English, this activity was rather slow and silent, thus creating a tense atmosphere in the classroom. But I would suggest that this activity is very appropriate for students at a higher level. Next activity is Monopoly. So a sample Monopoly and 2 dice were given to each group. Some of the speaking, I know you can see the words here, so I'm going to read some of the speaking topics of the sample Monopoly. A job you like, your hopes for the future, something you worry about, what makes you laugh, etc. And students love the game because it somewhat resembles gambling. So the classroom was lively, and because the game was exciting and interesting, and the topics were not intimidating. So even students at a lower level could have fun. In order to train students' application and creativity, I asked them to design their own version of Monopoly for other groups to play. And all students pitched in, especially those who were good at art, because they all wanted to play some kind of joke on their classmates. And I'm going to read some of the activities on their Monopoly. Who's the teacher you hate most? Sing an English song, hug your English teacher. What kind of girl do you like? What's your favorite food? Then sorry, finish a lap on the sports field. bark like a dog 3 times. So in my experience, I think it's important to monitor students' interaction, otherwise they are likely to switch into Chinese or just give one-word utterances for the given topics. And then they have to do the reading of this famous book. In this book, consonant clusters, vowels, and other phonemic units are included in the chants. By watching the film clip on YouTube and listening to native speakers read the book, students are able to correct their pronunciation, intonation, and word thinking. I will show you the clip of my students reading later. And then finally, critical thinking questions. In each reading, there is a critical thinking question that requires students to do some critical thinking, such as the following examples. Instead of asking students to answer those questions individually, I ask them to discuss in groups to make the task easier and less intimidating. However, students displayed resistance and reluctance to be engaged in this kind of activity. For one thing, they couldn't really express themselves in English, and for another, they couldn't think critically. So this activity was not only time-consuming, but a total failure. And students didn't appreciate it either, because they thought it was not helping them to prepare for the test. Now I'm going to show you the results that I got from the questionnaire. On my questionnaire, there are 9 statements, and students can choose among strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. And there is one open-ended question. So the first one is, I find it beneficial to me that my English teacher speaks only English in class. Most of my students thought it was very helpful to them. And number 2, it helps me more when I'm learning English in a group. Because grouping has both advantages and disadvantages, so a lot of students were unsure. Some agreed while others disagreed. My English listening proficiency has improved. Most of them agreed. And my English speaking proficiency has improved. Nearly 20 students were unsure. But I think they do not resist speaking English as much as they did before. Vocabulary cards help me enlarge and remember new vocabulary. More than half of my students disagreed. I will show you their comments later. And number 6, I think the activities that my English teacher conducted in class were a waste of time. So it was a comfort to me that somehow they appreciated the value of these activities, even though sometimes they refused to cooperate with me. I think the game table words is a good way of reviewing vocabulary and improving my listening and speaking skills. More than half of my students thought it was helpful. And the activity finds someone who is a good way to get to know each other and to practice speaking. A large percentage of them were unsure about that because, as I said, in this activity, most of them talked in Chinese or clustered together sharing the information they got. Next, the reading of one fish, two fish helps me with linking words, vowels, and intonation. Again, a large percentage of students were unsure. I think it's because not enough time was spent on the practice. And nearly 20 students thought it was very helpful. And now I'm going to show you a film clip in which one of the K groups read a small part of the reading at the very beginning of the semester. same group did the same part of reading after 2 months. So I think you would all agree with me that the final presentation was much better than the first one. There might not be significant progress on leaving words, vowels, and intonation, and they still spoke with heavy Taiwanese accent. However, they read with confidence and spoke, felt more relaxed, and were also eager to play with the words. That's what I noticed. And now I'm going to show you the results of pre-test and post-test. Unfortunately, post-test scored 3 points lower than the pre-test. And I talked to my students about the result, and they told me that they got used to their English teacher's accent. So when listening to foreign teachers, they felt very challenged. And I will share with you the exam results later. And these are the students' feedback. On the positive side, English songs are their favorite. And teachers' modeling in English was very helpful to them. Students got used to listening to English in class. This is their comment.
有帮助吗？这样可以让我们一直听英文觉得习惯。对，以后大学一定的。可是有时候以后都会听不懂，那怎么办？那就努力就习惯了就习惯听得懂。要老师夹杂一点中文吗？我觉得有时候。
And dialophone was very helpful in terms of vowels, but because it was practiced only once, it was soon forgotten. When it was suggested that this activity be done more often using different minimal pairs, students said that they would be bored with the same game. And on the negative side, making vocabulary cards was a waste of time. And students wouldn't read the cards afterwards. Vocabulary cards were not helpful, and students would choose the simplest words to look up. 有点浪费时间。为什么？因为做那个要用到很多时间，然后可以拿这些时间去练其他的书。我觉得其实我写的根本我也没有在看，真的写过之后。 可是同学背单词不是都很喜欢拿着生字书吗？那只是部分是主要的单词啊。通常如果要写那种题，大家都挑最简单、最少的就行。没有帮助，而且跟你浪费时间。因为课就要做很多单词，做一个单词还要浪费很多时间。一课不是做5个。可是这样很多时间还要查，然后有些像这些可以拿去。 那同一组不是可以做同样的文章吗？我觉得如果把上课的单词背好，然后那个自己课本例句有读熟，应该就够了。 2 taboo words were fun, and it was a good way of reviewing the vocabulary. But because students could hardly express themselves in English, this game was not successful. And students were also concerned that even if they could say the word correctly, it didn't mean that they could spell them in the exams. And their current experience.
我觉得这个很好玩。
我觉得很有趣，就是好像成功率没有很大，因为大家都不太会，就没有办法讲，然后也听不懂。
我觉得听得懂的话，只是不一定每个单词都学出来，因为考试还是考单词。是觉得对我有很大帮助。听力，我们可以大家彼此复习。
And the next one, grouping was not a good idea because when sitting together, students were playing, chatting, got distracted easily, so the classroom was very noisy. And number 4, activities took up too much class time, and as a result, too little time was left for the textbook lessons. Therefore, the teacher taught the lessons so fast that there was no time for them to digest them. And number 5, critical thinking questions and group discussions were time-consuming, and my students reminded me that their priority is to prepare themselves for the college entrance exam. And number 6, some students mentioned that the activity they hated most was reading a book. And number 7, I asked student representative this question. In general, I'm sorry, there is a wrong spelling here. In general, do you think the activities we did in class were helpful to you in terms of your English listening and speaking proficiency?
我觉得都还好。
我觉得就是如果现在是以课业啊，就是办法成绩为重的话，但是活动可能会占用大部分教课的时间。
然后活动有时候太多的时候会造成，就是我有时候进度太慢，他们会课分的，就是一些诱导性的问题之类等等一些耗时间。你是说批判性思考的问题？一下以生育为重之类的。可是全民英检不是有口说？有啊。
I respect their opinions. And now, these are the challenges that I faced and my personal reflection. I think the biggest challenge was the time constraint. Is the time up? Yes. And activities didn't contribute to satisfactory midterm exam results. And songs worked wonders in teaching English. And because the exam results were a disaster, I got reported by my students. They reported me to the principal for conducting too many activities because they were concerned the large quantity of time spent on the activities. And you have seen the final presentation of that one presentation. The atmosphere in the classroom was very relaxed and lively. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.
One question. Thank you very much. Start with the last group, or do you feel like you need a break? Are we waiting? have a confession to make. For all the years as an English teacher, my worst fear has always been that one day I might have to teach listening and speaking for the entire class, week after week. I hope those are sympathetic smiles. Maybe some of you share my pain. Alright, but last year I had the honor of joining the UBC program, and I decided to tackle at least one of my nightmares. I mean, my worries have been, what if the students don't understand? What if they don't respond? What if they are not interested? And worst of all, and this one I'm so sure I'm going to use a question form. There are simply too many of them in one class. Agreed? Okay, good. Which is why I'm glad that my school agreed to my suggestion of offering an elective course for freshmen. We meet 2 hours every Wednesday, and although the student number went slightly over my proposed 15 to 19 of them, well, since it's an elective, that means we don't have a fixed syllabus, and there will be no exams. And the class content can be very, very flexible. So I thought I could breeze through the semester. I was so naive. And in my first class, I did a pre-test survey and a warm-up activity disguised as self-introduction. And immediately I discovered that this, after all, is a class consisting of mixed level students, with 3 of them having spent 2 to 3 years in English-speaking countries. So they were fluent with probably few mistakes. And 7 of them very willing to speak despite obvious mistakes. 9 of them were more receptive than productive. That means that they were more inclined to stay silent if possible and unnoticed if possible. So I had to think of some strategies to deal with a class such as this. And I decided to start with basics. In my survey, one of my questions was, what do you find most difficult in learning English? And the 2 answers that topped the list were saying what I mean. They knew what they were trying to say, but they couldn't find the words. Although most of the time the words were already there, but the connection between their memory and their mouth is not very good. And the second one is understanding when the speaker uses unfamiliar word. Their understanding will be blocked, and they would replay the unfamiliar words and then neglect the rest of the information. So by starting with basics, I would try to fix pronunciation, and I would activate their passive vocabulary, and I would try to boost their confidence. And also, I would love to try something that I had been doing in my regular classes, that is learning through doing and teaching, which I will share later. In the pre-test, my students were asked to recite an excerpt from Green Apple and Cat by Dr. Seuss, and they did a listening test, roughly the same level as the GPT intermediate test. And then I collected their recordings, analyzed them, and did the diagnosis. One way to facilitate language acquisition, I believe, is large amount of exposure to the target language, which is why my students were asked to do 2 exercises from Randall's ESL cycle listening lab. I was introduced to this website only just last summer, and I would strongly encourage that you use it too. It's every teacher's best friend. It's got everything, you don't have to do anything. And the students love it, most importantly. They had to do 2 practices every week, but they don't just, listen and then do the questions. They had to listen to the content at least 4 times until they could almost visualize the words. And then they would look at there's a transcript on the website as well, so they could see